Chavre, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, und freilich, begashmis und beruchnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Today is Erev Shabbos Kodesh Parshas Vayigash, Vav Tevis, and in Mr. Hashem, Tuesday will be Asara B'Tevis. So as usual, we have to understand the connections between all these things and what lessons do we derive in our service of Hashem. Before we start, we'll begin with a prayer as usual, and today we'll start with the first pasuk of Kapitel Chav Daled in Tilim. It's very famous. With David Mizmer, Ladino Yoretz Umelayo, Tevel V'yesh Vevo, which means this is a psalm by David HaMelech. LaHashem Yoretz Umelayo. To Hashem belongs the land and its contents, Tevel V'yesh Vevo, the world and all who inhabit it. Rashi says, LaHashem Yoretz, the land, refers to Eretz Yisrael. And Tevel refers to Shor Arotzes, the other lands. But in general, this pasuk tells us that everything belongs to Hashem, everything is Hashem, and before we partake or benefit any pleasure, we first give thanks to Hashem, because we have to ask permission if we could to use anything of His. That's why it's a wonderful custom in Jewish Svarim. We're coming from Hey Tevis, the holiday of holy books, the Dan Notzach of the Sfarim. So the Jewish custom is, in every book, Sefer, we write, Hashem ha'aretz u'mloya, to Hashem belongs everything, and then we write our name. Like, with the permission of the Master of the universe, could we use this? It really doesn't belong to me. The same thing the Mishnah Nova says in Pirkei Avos, Ten loy mishaloi. When you give charity, you're giving from Him. So that's the verse. And obviously, like everything in life, when we speak about certain principles, it's this concept which changes everything. And we'll discuss how it's related to this week's Parsha very shortly. So, this week's Parsha is a monumental Parsha which speaks about great historic events. The brothers are reconciled, Yosef and his brothers. There's major friction, then there's peace and reconciliation, and then finally, father and son are reunited after 22 years. Yaakov is reunited with Yosef, his beloved son. So the verse says, when they first meet, at the first encounter after 22 years, the pasuk says that Vayal likras Yisrael Aviv, Yosef went to his father. Vayera Elov, he appeared before him. Vayipal al tzavorav, he fell on his neck. Vayevch al tzavorav oid, and he wept on his neck excessively. What does Rashi say over here? What was Yaakov doing? It doesn't say they both wept. It just says that Yosef wept. Rashi says, Aval Yaakov linofal al tzavor Yosef. Yaakov didn't fall on Yosef's neck. Rabbi Seinu, our sages say, Shoyakoire Shema. He was reading the Shema. So this is a very famous issue which is addressed by all commentators. Was happened? Punkt. At that minute, they couldn't arrange something before. He could have had messages. He could have known the royal chariot is approaching. Punkt. When Yosef walks through the door, Yaakov's in the middle of reading Krishma. What's the meaning of this? So, the great commentators, the Maral and Gur Aryeh, some bring it down in the name of the Kotzker, say that over here we have an unparalleled emotional moment. A father's love which is welled up for 22 years. He hasn't seen his beloved son. So now we're going to take 22 years of concentrated affection and love, and there's going to be an immense, intense outburst of love, an outpouring of love. Unprecedented. Not too many people experience such a joy after so much separation. So Yaakov Avinu, being the tzaddik that he was, wanted to direct that love straight away to Hashem. So it's not that he was reading Shema when Yosef walked through the door. He wanted to utilize that moment to channel that unbelievable love to Hashem. And in Shema Yisrael, we speak about Hashem's unity, but also V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, love of Hashem. So immediately he was channeling it towards Hashem. And similar to what the Mishnah says, Kol ma shebara HaKadosh Baruch Hu, bara l'chvoidei. Everything that God created, He created for His glory. So therefore, if there's a great feeling of love, something unique and extraordinary, He's going to channel it towards Hashem. So that's what some Mefarshim say. But Ulay Yeshleima, maybe we could say, in true Chabad, Hasidus fashion, that over here it's not only about the Vahavta, the love, but also it's about the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, the idea of God's unity. Einay Milvadai, everything is God, and seeing God and the oneness of God in everything. And maybe that's why Yaakov said it at that moment, to give a certain message to Yosef. So according to the way we look at it now, it's two separate things. There's Yaakov's love towards Yosef, and it's like somebody who's always thanking Hashem. He goes, Yishtabach Shemo. He's directing it towards Hashem straight away, which is great, which is unbelievable. But nevertheless, in a way, is that the message to Yosef, to show Yosef that my love of God is the greatest thing and supersedes all? Or maybe there's also a lesson in the story and the events that unfolded in the past 22 years. So, one of the key themes of the story of Yosef and his brothers is the pasuk which is in this week's parsha, Vayigash, but it's so important and so powerful that it's repeated at the end of Vayichi also. And that is that Yosef reassures his brothers that it's not their fault. They didn't really sin. Even though they have to do tshuva, that's a separate story. But the way they're meant to look at it, as we've spoken about many times before, reframing, because the perception creates the reality. According to your perception, that will be the reality. That is the reality. And the pasuk says over here in Parshas Vayigash that when Yosef meets his brothers, he right away tells them the words that you shouldn't feel bad, because really, Loi atem shlachtem oisi, you didn't send me. Heina ki olikim, Hashem sent me. And he said it before, right before that, Vayishlacheni elikim lefnechem, losum lechem, she'elis ba'aretz, ulehachis lechem lefleita gedela. Hashem sent me to Egypt so I should be able to give food to my family, for you, and for the whole world. And the same thing in the end. At the end of Parashat Vayichi, he again reassures his brothers, and over there it's maybe even more clear, where Yosef tells his brothers that Atem chashavtem alai ra, va'atem chashavtem alai ra, although you intended me harm, Elikim chashav l'teva. Hashem intended it for the good. So with these words lies the answer to forgiveness. As the Alter Rebbe explains at the end of chapter 12, which is a very, very powerful subject, and I think one that touches most of us very deeply and intimately. People have grievances. Things happen in life. I'm offended. He humiliated me. He doesn't treat me right, etc. So you have to realize that the Jewish view and the Or HaChaim HaKadosh in this week's parasha elaborates on this, is that the truth is no other person, no other thing has a power over you. The fact that the other person intended to harm you, and the fact that the other person does not have such sterling character traits, that's irrelevant. He might be a bum, he might be a bit nasty, he might be a bit cruel, he might be a bit mean, even though I'm not saying that about anybody, we're just speaking the concept now. But his character traits and his intentions cannot touch you. They're inconsequential. They have no agency on your being. If anything happened to you, that's because the Eibishter decided it should happen to you. And what the Eibishter decides to happen to you is for your good. We're not going to elaborate today on this subject, but that's the point. And the novelty in the story of Yosef and his brothers is that Yosef was able to demonstrate it. It was revealed. It became obvious and evident that the entire chain of events, from the second Yosef walks out of his father's home and he meets that angel and tells him, go there, there was a chain of events that was extraordinary, spectacular, outstanding, and that every single detail was clearly divine providence for him to end up in a place where he can interpret the dreams of Paro and then become the viceroy and then come up with a plan to sustain the whole world. And that's the literal meaning of the words in the pasuk. But then the more grand, eternal plan of what the Eibishter told Avram Avinu by the Bris Bein Absarim, Ki ger yeh zaracha be'eretz lo Elohem, and v'avodim v'ino isom, and v'achechen yetzu b'chush gadol. So the whole story of the birth of the Jewish nation begins with Yaakov walking out of the door that morning, when we spoke about this many times. So this is what Yosef told his brothers, not about the whole birth of the Jewish nation, but about the fact that there was a famine, there was going to be a famine, and Hashem had to orchestrate the plan in such a way that I should be in the position to be able to accomplish what I accomplish. And they say God works in mysterious ways. You could say God works in mysterious ways. You could say God works in funny ways. But God works in the best way and the most effective way. And this is how it worked out. And it was clearly from Hashem. So, you have no power over me. So therefore, all of your intentions equal nothing. They don't mean a thing. Because nothing what you planned was really going on over here. So therefore, it was only Hashem's work. And I bear no grudge, and therefore we could have forgiveness, because you did nothing to me, it was all God. So that's the answer to forgiveness. As the Alter Rebbe explains at the end of chapter 12, when you look at everything that happens to you in your life, that has nothing to do with any other person. It's about your personal relationship with God. And more so, it's actually going to be for the best, because kol ma'adav derachmon l'tavavid, so then you don't bear a grudge. And this explains, really, in a way, the mitzvahs loisase midiraisa, both of loisikum, you shouldn't take revenge, and loisiter, you're not allowed to bear a grudge, which these are biblical commandments. So in general, we see over here, and I think we've mentioned this maybe even today, I forgot already, the concept of reframing. But in Judaism and in Torah and in Chassidus, it's very, very important, because this is in every step of your life. And I believe we've spoken about this many times, and I'll speak about it again and again, because I believe this is the number one issue. And it's about a perspective. Always there's two perspectives. There's a secular perspective and a Torah perspective. And therefore, it's what your perspective is, which is your reality. So, first of all, there's two famous analogies. And I'm not going to split hairs now, what's the difference between one and the other. But one of them is a famous one the Rebbe said many times. I think it originates from the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe. And I think in the original analogy, it's not even necessarily about two scholars, Torah scholars. It could be about two scientists, whatever. So there's two scientists, so call them two scholars, lahavdil, between mundane and holiness. And they're in a wagon, a horse and buggy, and they're discussing deep concepts. If they're scientists, they're talking about time, space, and the universe. And if they're Torah scholars, they're talking about a machlekes, the Rashba, the Ran, the Ritva. And who knows, if they're Chassidim, they're talking about Atzilus and Bria and Yitzirah. Anyways, that's what they're thinking about as they're traveling in the horse and buggy to whatever their destination is. Meanwhile, the horse driver, the wagon driver, he's thinking about arriving at the destination and how much he's going to get paid for the trip. And the horses, what are they thinking about? They're thinking about straw. And the famous line I heard from the Rebbe many times by Fabrengen, Tziden val de Fer tracht wegen Haber, beit is the Metzies. Because the horses are thinking about straw, does it change the reality? The reality is, or what the scientists are talking about, or what the Chacham are talking about, the reality is that's really happening over here is that two scholars discussing the deepest, most profound concepts. And in their world, that's all that exists. And they're there. What is this trip? This trip is where two scholars came to conclusions in the most loftiest, abstract, spiritual concepts. Now you have a driver. He's thinking about getting his paycheck, his wages. Fine. He could think about that. And you have the horses thinking about straw. But it doesn't affect what the scholars were talking about. That's one analogy. There's another analogy the Rebbe would give. I think it's in Lekutei Sichas Chelik Vav Yisrei. I didn't think about looking at it today, so I'm just going to tell you from what I remember. And Rabbi Yoel used to chazed this one many times. I didn't hear it from the Rebbe. And that is when it comes to a din Torah. We have a court case. So it's a din, it's a machlokes in Choshen Mishpat, a monetary dispute. So we have the Rabbanim, the rabbis that are presiding over the court case. We have the Shofet, those are the Shoftim. We have the Shaiter, the enforcers, those who have to enforce the law, marshals. And then we have the litigants, the ones who are involved in the case. So it's three perspectives that I would say. By the Rabbanim, what's going on over here? It's a concept in Torah. Tzime cooked of them, Vidaran cooked of them, Tzime cooked of them, Vidabin Tam cooked of them. It's a concept in halacha, it's a concept in law. How do we look at this? It's a question of this, or it's a question of that. So it's a concept, and it's a deep debate, and an intellectual, a Torah concept debate about the court case. Whether we look at it this way or that way. So it's a concept in Torah. It's a Torah thought. That's in the eyes of the shofet. In the eyes of the shaitor, he has to hear what the psak is. To him, what's important is just to get to the ruling, and then he has to know to make sure that that person, let's say there's Reuven and Shimon, and the court case ruled in favor of Reuven, then he has to make sure Shimon has to pay up. So he's got to make sure to know who's the one that he has to monitor, supervise, that's going to pay up. And to the two litigants, it's not about who's going to have to be the one that's losing, but about the $500,000, whether he lost $500,000 or whether he lost, or he didn't lose it. The Rabbanim don't care b'chlal. They're not thinking about whether it's $500,000 here is at stake, because it's not about the money, it's about the concept, whether we look at it like this or whether we look at it like that. In the shaiter, the monitor, the enforcers, they also really doesn't make a difference to them whether it's $500,000. It could be a court case about $5. And in the end, they have to know who the one they have to make sure has to pay the $5. But to the two litigants, it's really about the $500,000, the money, how much money they're either going to gain or how much money they're going to lose. So we see in both analogies how different, it's three different worlds, three different perspectives. And the same thing is so much in life, what we're experiencing, what we see around us is about what lens are we looking through? Are we looking through the lens of Torah and it's one reality or not? And this is the story over here with Yosef and his brothers. When we talk about reframing, put your mind in the right place and your heart will feel the right way. And it's so important that we have to drill into our heads all the time. Now, let's go back to the story of Yaakov reading the Shema. Ulei Shleimar. Do you know why Yaakov was reading the Shema right now? Because he wanted to tell Yosef. Because he heard from his other sons when they came back. And obviously they told him that Yosef is still alive. And he asked them, so what happened? And they told him what happened. And they told him exactly what Yosef had said. This whole idea. That it wasn't you, it was Hashem. I was sent. It was all divine providence, clearly, etc., etc. So now Yosef and Yaakov are meeting. When Yaakov starts reading the Shema, the message to Yosef is, you were right. I agree with you. We're in sync. This is the Torah view. This is the Torah's perspective. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Achdus Hashem, Einoid Milvadei. It's all you. So it's an affirmation, and it's a validation, and it's an agreement. The first thing they meet, Yaakov tells Yosef, even though he's talking to Hashem, and he's proclaiming God's unity, but the message he's telling Yosef at the same time is that yes, the way you looked at it, the way you perceived it, your perception and your perspective is 100% correct. And this is the unbelievable lesson that we have to think about life in general. Train yourselves, train your children, train your family, train your entire sphere of influence. That everything we have to look at is do, weiter do. It's all elikus. And then we'll experience life in every single area on a whole different level. See also the Alter Rebbe in chapter 33 of the Tanya. Now we could also maybe connect it, obviously in a very clear way, with Tevis. I don't want to elaborate because I think I once spoke a video about this. Asar B'Tevis, the Rebbe says, Pshat, this is one of the most classical examples of the Rebbe's Torah perspective. That on the one hand we see Asar B'Tevis as the worst of the fast, because then it started. It started with the siege, then they breached the walls, then they destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. Asar B'Tevis, Shivasa B'Tammuz, and Tisha B'Av. Comes along the Rebbe, and the Rebbe teaches us a principle that we say that in Torah by the Eibishter we say Higdim Refuah Lemaka. the healing precedes the wound. The solution, the solutions are implanted before the problems. So, you know the famous expression, Houston, we've got a problem. So the truth is, according to Torah, we say always before such a statement, Houston, we've got a solution. Because there has to be a solution, according to the real way, according to the Das Torah. So the Rebbe learns that even though Asar B'Tevis was the beginning of the end, but that's not really the way Hashem intended it. As the Rebbe explains in the Sichos, and we spoke about it, the words that are used in the Razal to say what happened in Asar B'Tevis are Somach Melech Bavel. The king of Bavel, Somach, is over here translated, made a siege, but Somach could also be used in a positive sense. Soimech Neiflim, he supports those that are falling. So Somach, the Rebbe says the reason why over here we use the word Somach, because the truth was that this was meant to help us. The siege was meant to help us. How? Because Ilu Zachino, if we would have merited, we would have gotten the hint. What was the hint? That what's lacking is unification and unity, Avas Yisrael, between their Jews. So what does Hashem do? He creates a situation where we have to be together. We're in a siege. We're a captive audience. And it's like we say, we could do this two ways. We could do it in a way that we can enjoy ourselves and time will fly. Let's sit down and make each other have a good time, say some jokes or whatever. Or we could be miserable. We're going to make bickering and arguing worse and worse. So this was what Hashem did. He made a situation that if we had gotten the message properly, we'd utilize the time to enhance, fix, remedy our Avos Yisrael. We didn't do it properly. So then the Asara B'Tevis became worse and went to Shiva Sabbatamos and then Tisha B'Av. But if we would have taken the message properly, there would have never been a Shiva Sabbatamos or a Tisha B'Av. So here again, when we look at Asara B'Tevis, we see a tremendous novelty of the Rebbe. How do we look at Asara B'Tevis? Do we look at it only as a negative thing? Like the beginning of the end? Like people sometimes come to certain situations and they just throw in the towel because they give up. That's it. It's over. Or some other way. We have to look at it. We never give up. There must be some other message here. There's a message of empowerment. There's a message of growth. There's a message of development. We just have to be able to discern the correct message and grab onto it and do the right thing. There's a fantastic story I'll just finish off with that brings out this point. And there's so many stories like this with the Rebbe, but just one that I read recently, which I think is fantastic because it brings out the concept so beautifully. There's a Mrs. Teichtel in Crown Heights, and she's one of the faculty members of Beis Rivka, a very honorary member. So she says a story that when she was 13 years old, she wanted to go to a girls' school called Beis Yaakov. Now, her father, Olav Shalom, was a very famous chassid, Reb Meir Itkin, very celebrated chassid, very unique chassid, very special chassid. You could say Chassidischkeit was running through his veins. If you cut him, Chassidischkeit would come out pouring. He was a very Chassidic Jew. So the daughter, who was 13, wanted to go to Beis Yaakov, and just her luck, as she says the story, they had opened up a Beis Rivka for the first time, which is the Lubavitch branch of schools for girls. So her father was saying, okay, you're going to have to go to Beis Rivka. Now that there's Lubavitcher girls' school and we are Lubavitchers, you're going to go to the Beis Rivka. She didn't want to go to Beis Rivka because her older sister had gone to Beis Yaakov. And she was telling her father, I don't want to go to a new school. And she actually used the expression, I don't want to be the first class in a new school. And she wrote, I don't want to be experimented on. I don't want to be a guinea pig. That's the word she wrote to the Rebbe. Oh, so her father said, you have to write to the Rebbe. Write to the Rebbe, and if the Rebbe agrees that you can go to Beis Yaakov, no problem. So she wrote to the Rebbe that she doesn't want to be a guinea pig. So the Rebbe answered by crossing out the words guinea pig and wrote pioneer. And she said, of course, I went to Beis Rivka. So this is genius. If we say the word guinea pig, means you're a victim. If we say the word guinea pig, it means you're acted upon. Someone else has agency over you. You've lost all control, and you're just going along. And it's a negative concept, obviously. But if you say pioneer, she says, pioneer? Of course I want to be a pioneer. I'll climb mountains. I'll be an explorer. I'll be an inventor. You say the word pioneer has the connotation of you are in control, you have independence, it's going to cultivate your creativity, there's originality, etc., etc. So this is the choice we have in life, my friends. In every single situation, we could look at the story of Yosef and his brothers and say, we have to get revenge, we have to make it even. Or we look at the brothers and we say, no, this was the greatest gift. It was God bringing benefit to the entire world and to my own family and to myself. I would have never reached this greatness of Viceroy, etc., etc. And the same thing over here. In general, this is how we have to ask ourselves the question. Are we looking at Torah b'tevis as something which is negative or something which inherently was really positive? And are we looking at ourselves as guinea pigs or as pioneers? Maybe should help that we shouldn't even come to Asara B'Tevis this year. It should be in Yerushalayim HaKodesh, B'Meira V'Yameinu, and like the Rambam says, there will be no more fast days. All the fast days will be turned into Yom Tovim. B'Geula Amitis V'Shleima, take it from Yad Mamish. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisborich, your man in Melbourne.